I am absolutely delighted to introduce our next speaker, who came from very far away, all the way at the top northern part of Canada, which is quite far from here. Norma Kassi is the advisor to the Canadian Indigenous Leadership Initiative and co-director of the Canadian Mountain Network. Raised and educated in Old Crow, the most northerly community in the Yukon, Norma has never lost focus on her community. In 2007, she co-founded the Arctic Institute of Community-Based Research. The goal of AICBR is to promote community-based northern-led research aimed at improving the lives of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of the North and promoting the health of their environments. The title of Norma's talk is Our Changing Homelands, Our Changing Lives. And so I introduce Norma Kassi.
Thank you, Mindy, for that. Masi cho shalak nai. I come from, as Mindy said, I have to stand on my tiptoes, a small community called Old Crow, Yukon. It's called Crow May I Walk to begin with. Dakota people, which in Kai, Jatnoan Nokanat Kak Nai Dik and Jit Klaju Haitnithan. To the organizers, thank you for inviting me and having this opportunity here in the next 3 days. It's already been a real awesome teachings and learning. I was in the 7 Generations workshop this afternoon and learned a lot from a couple of very young people, and I'm very grateful. I'd like to acknowledge the Dakota people for us to deliberate here on your homelands, to learn and to share knowledge. Thank you for that. I was very fortunate. I'm just going to let, as you see, my community is way up there called Old Crow, Yukon, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which I'll refer to, and then talk about a lot about the caribou as well, and you see how far away we are from each other. So I'm just going to let the slides roll and not speak to the slides. I was really fortunate to have been born into my community when it was very traditional and our culture was really strong and intact. Only our Mantagujin language was spoken. Kwahatlakti is my name, the one who gives away their last cup of tea. And I'm Vantatgujin, people of the lakes. We're part of the Dene Nation, from the Navajos and Apaches all the way up to where we live in Alaska. I don't live in Alaska. I have relatives and communities in Alaska. I live in North Yukon. We have our nation, my nation, goes into in Alaska, Northwest Territories, and there are 9,000 approximately of us left, and we're still growing. The Yukon is home to 40,000 people, 25% of which are Indigenous peoples. I know that this conference is about food and nutrition. To me and to our people, it's difficult to talk about food and nutrition without talking about our lands, our sacred waters, and give some context to our history, and of course, the climatic changes and its effects on our everyday lives. Because to this day, our people still rely on the health of our lands and our traditional and country foods that come from our homelands. Today, I'm going to tell you a story of the challenges that we face and talk about the solutions that we are doing to mitigate. I will as I say, let the photos roll. In my homeland, there are thousands of lakes that are all attached to each other. This is North America's second biggest wetland. This is my home, and it's all more beautiful than I could ever describe. I was raised by my grandfather and my mother. The first 10 years of my life, we lived amongst the lakes. Actually, I lived there till I still go there. But my grandfather raised me the first 10 years of my life. And being the firstborn, I was the one that got the pack sack. And I know that some of the elders here understand what I'm saying when we say we get the pack sack. I was the firstborn, so I was the one that got the little teapot, some tea, some matches, 60 rounds of 22 shells, and of course the canoe. I was really proud. I was told to go. So I was gone for 2 nights, and I never sleep, and I got lots and lots of muskrats and black ducks, our food, and we were trappers. We hunted for muskrats. He carried me on his back all over the land. He taught me everything about every living bird, plant, all the living things in our surroundings. He also taught me about things that were going to come into the future across our homelands. One day we move. This is from March, April, May, June, and we go home in June. We live in our homelands in Old Crow Flats in the springtime. And we just finish pulling across the land. Really, it's tough with our dog team on just bare land, and we're moving to our next camp closer to the river so that we can go down with our dogs. And we sat down and had tea once our camp was set up there, and he said, you know, my girl, one day, he was telling me about the snowmobile that was going to come, and that your brother is going to go just fast like that and move that fast. And I asked him things like, how do you know? Like, you never even been out of our country. How do you know? He said, I know. Going to be lots of people, lots of changes. In May, thousands of birds from all over the world, from Chesapeake Bay, Hawaii, Chile, Argentina, come to our homelands and bring life to the wetlands. They come from way outside, was all that I knew at that time. I learned later that there are about 143 various species of waterfowl that join us and begin building their nests and lay their eggs all over our lands, and we look after them. There was an abundance of good, healthy foods. These foods that are healthy for our bodies, our minds, our spirit, our culture, and brought our communities together from past to present through the knowledge of our elders. There was no white man medicine, as it was referred to, no pills. Everything we needed was at our fingertips. I was fortunate to have learned so much about life by living on the land, so close to our natural world, where only the natural laws govern our every move. The way the wind blows, the kinds of snow, the way the snow piles was important, and we had sunlight for 24 hours of it all. And the way we communicate with the animals, languages, in our language, straight up. We were secure, and there was no fear. We lived in harmony with our surroundings and respected its lessons. One of the most important is when the caribou comes. They walk by our tent, our camp. I used to lay on the ground, and they grunt and walk around me, past me. They're so precious to us. Through thick ice and snow, they make their way to northeastern Alaska. The pregnant cows come and sleep on the lake on the ice. They eat, and we have to be quiet in camp, and we do ceremonies as they're sleeping there. They're pregnant cows. They're going miles, 200 miles north to the north coast. And they eat, they forage on, they eat muskrat, what the muskrats bring up on the lakes for them. And they eat that, and then the cows would just go to sleep there for hours, and then they get up and move. and the bulls would take care of them. And I learned later, I'm going to talk about it a bit, that where our lakes had drained, and I went home right away one time when one of our major lakes had drained away, and I looked down below as I walk on that lake that's drained, and I see caribou poop germinating, and that was the cycle and connection to the muskrats and the rest of the land that came from willows and lichen and everything that the caribou ate. They make their journey towards the calving grounds in northeastern Alaska, and they give birth. We call this place Untitled. We never refer to it as a refuge in our language. It's where life begins. For many days, we watch the caribou pass by our camps by the hundreds, the pregnant cows resting, young bulls watching over them, protecting them. Then 40,000 calves are born like clockwork in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as it's known today, and this continues. In August and September, they will begin their trek back. They are now through our villages, and they're going to feed our people, and they're starting to come. That cycle continues, however, now in a very different way. Hunting and harvesting, fishing is our way of life, and we honor the animals and the berries, the fish, everything. They are our sacred foods. They nourish our bodies and everything. All we have from the store in our camps, from our little community in our Old Crow, our little store, all we have from there is tea, a little bit of rice, macaroni, raisins, oats, and flour, and of course sugar. And that's all we bring to the flats for those 4 months. And everything else came from the land. The Porcupine Caribou is one of the largest barren ground migrating caribou left on this planet. It's one of the few remaining herds that's still thriving because we fought hard to protect it and its habitat. We care for them deeply. We spiritualize with them. We are connected. Our elders from the past never allowed trophy hunting or big game hunting within our Gwich'in country. I used to crisscross your country here from coast to coast for 24 years, starting in 1987. We fought hard, including with our many allies across this country, and managed to hold off oil and gas development in the sacred calving grounds, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, since the Reagan years, and went through 5 presidential administrations and had a grace period under the Clinton and Obama administration. And now we're back to square one. With this guy, Trump, Arctic Refuge is being strongly recommended to be open for oil and gas exploration by his administration, including the state of Alaska. The proposed development is right in the middle of the calving grounds, where 40,000 calves are born, which is our food. The caribou are under major threat, and so is my people. So the fight continues. The other day, we had a little bit of good news. The House of Representatives voted 225 to 193 on the first ever standalone bill to protect the refuge. It may not go far. It has to go through the Senate and this guy. We will continue to fight for the protection of this one and only large herd left on this planet. This has been our main source of food since time immemorial. This is our blood. We are caribou people, and we will never give up. Traders, amongst the changes that began to come as well, traders and missionaries started coming early in the 1700s and on. Many traders and missionaries built intimate relationships with our people. We welcomed them, we took care of them. They came with new foods, new tools, guns that made life easier. and in many cases, incurable diseases of which there was no immunity. And they used poison, cyanide. They would kill caribou and put poison on the caribou, and this poison killed off many animals and birds within our country. Our grandfathers had to escort them off our lands into Alaska or to Northwest Territories. At 6 years old, I was plucked out of my home and taken to residential school and went through a lot of harm during those 2 years. When the airplane came back to pick us up in September, I ran away. I went up into the hills and went in the bush, and I stayed there till the plane took off. I was 8 years old, and my grandfather took me back to the land. My mom had 2 sisters before me that were also taken and never returned. She had 7 other brothers and sisters. They all died of smallpox, TB, and residential schools. This is the beginning of major changes that were to come to our societies, to our well-being, our cultures, our language, our connectivity, spirituality, and identities as Indigenous peoples. Colonialization is pervasive and persistent, and a persistent force. The story and the impacts of colonialization is similar, as we know, for many Indigenous peoples around the world. Our communities were never quite the same after we were stolen from our homelands. This is especially true when it comes to our food systems. While in residential school, many of our brothers and sisters were used as scientific, medical, and nutritional research. We were treated as guinea pigs in many cases. Many of our people were starved. As a result, majority of our people have diabetes, heart diseases, heart issues, or other diseases that stem from abuse and malnutrition, and the story continues. It affected the translation of our ancient knowledge, the intergenerational sharing that would happen on our land. It also disconnected us in a way to our traditional foods, in every way. Ultimately, it has affected our health and well-being. Suicide is on the rise in the Arctic communities, more so as the ice and snow melts and the lakes and rivers dry. Our young men can no longer go out and travel our homelands at any time in the spring and winter. The ice is too thin. Stuck in the communities, and accumulation of all of this contributing to all the social problems within our Arctic communities, and their duty to provide and protect our people is compounded by the changes that we face, and these brothers are hunters and traditional men. They can't provide like they used to for us anymore without the ice. I had a brother. He was a strong spiritual man, plagued by addictions, of course. He had 3 boys, and he worked really hard to teach them all the cultural skills that they needed to survive into these challenging times, but he couldn't. He decided to leave us September 14th, 2 years ago. There is always our intimate knowledge of the land and its abundance that prevails, that make us stronger. The land is our essence. It looks after us, and in turn, it is our sacred duty to protect her. The world is now facing the greatest challenge ever for humankind, and that is climate change. We are at a crisis point with our Mother Earth. We were forewarned over and over, and thousands of years. People chose not to listen. It is not a distant and slow reality, but a rapid and devastating force being witnessed before our eyes on a daily basis. This will affect everyone on the planet. We had prophecies. Many of the elders here will remember the prophecies that came from our people, our ancient ones. Our elders told us of the insects, the mosquitoes, the rodents that people tried hard to eradicate will turn on us. Waters will be poisoned. There will be big fires. Our lands will burn. Food and clean water will become scarce. They told us the ice that melts will unearth diseases like smallpox, TB, and those diseases that were introduced to us will come again, including the poisons from the sky, as our people described it. Persistent organic pollutants that gravitated to the cold of our country that was supposedly been taken care of by the world leaders and scientists way back when, in the early 80s or in the 80s and 90s. And all of this will bring incurable diseases and sickness. What humans and their mighty corporations have done to our planet is coming back on us. We can see Mother Earth fighting back ferociously already. She needs our help. There's a lot that we can do, each of us. And all of us here, we care about our food, we love our lands, we want to make things better, we want to feed our people and put good, healthy food on our tables. This is good. We're gathered here for that. In my homelands, my people of the lakes, these lakes are now draining away due to permafrost melt, releasing tons of methane and mercury. In 2007, Zelma Lake, named after my dear auntie from long ago, this 5-kilometer lake, square lake, which used to welcome thousands of migratory birds, muskrats, beavers, and all the fish, and many of our traditional food species, drained in one single day because of the permafrost around the banks melted away. So goes many of our lakes and Old Crow Flats. As our ice and snow melts and pour down the Porcupine and Crow rivers by my village, into the Yukon River, into the North Pacific, our brothers and sisters on the South Pacific Islands are drowning. In southeast Yukon, mountains of the Southern Shoshone and Tlingit peoples, in 2016, Ayechu, the Slims River, which fed the largest lake in the Yukon, the Hluanman, or Kluane Lake, disappeared in a matter of 3 days. The cause was a diversion of the runoff from the rapidly melting Kaskawalsh Glacier, which is a glacier in one of the world's largest ice fields in the south part of the Yukon Territory. Huge mountains. The lake has an abundance of many kinds of fish. This lake that had an abundance of many kinds of fish no longer has salmon. And what was once fresh glacial waters flowing into the Kluane Lake from all around has now turned into a dry silt blowing down the mountains, creating islands and increasing shorelines. And this silt also contains a certain kind of mercury. These two stories give you a perspective and a picture of how climatic changes is affecting our water and our food systems in the Yukon and in the Arctic regions. The Yukon is the most rapidly warming place on Earth, one of the rapidly warming places on Earth. It is warming at 2 times the rate of southern Canada. Our foods, based on our most recent estimate, which came from 2012, about 17% of our households in the Yukon are food insecure. In our neighboring territories, the rates are closer to 24% in the Northwest Territories, and in Nunavut, to the far east, 70% of children go to bed hungry every night. We talk about nutrition. We're just trying to get food on our children's plates in many places in the north. Most of these are Indigenous and Inuit peoples. Most of the communities in the Arctic regions are fly-in communities, including mine. Our food systems are intimately connected to climate change in many ways. Natural disasters like floods and wildfire, as we speak, there's evacuation alerts in 2 of our communities in the mid part of the Yukon Territory. These disasters threaten our roads, infrastructure, and local agriculture and can't compete with the globalized food systems. Cost of shipping food north is really high, and most of what is considered healthy and environmentally friendly is too expensive for many of our people. The cost of feeding a family of 4 in Whitehorse, Yukon, Yukon's capital city in the south of the territory, costs upwards of $275 a week. While in Old Crow, in my community, it costs $500 a week, even with a federal food subsidy that seeks to reduce prices for a fly-in community. This is why our caribou and our salmon, our traditional species, are so important to us. Despite what is happening, though, to our beautiful lands and majestic homelands, we still continue to be blessed with an abundance of foods and medicine from various areas throughout our homelands. Many of our communities have had good harvests this fall. Berries was good, caribou came by for a little while, people are getting moose, and a lot of people are getting our food, and there's a lot more sharing going on. My life's work has been alongside champions across the Arctic and Canada to promote self-sufficiency, self-determination, and community-driven strategies of survival in the area of food security and climate change. In the past 4 years, the Canadian government has made unprecedented progress in Indigenous rights and issues such as the start of the implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations and opened the inquiry to missing and murdered women and girls in our country. And we have long ways to go, but they also stepped up to assist communities to address food insecurity and build adaptive strategies, which is a necessary step to address rising concern about our food insecurity issues in our country. As an example, Indigenous communities, our Yukon First Nations communities, such as Trondequichin, and I understand I have a sister from Trondequichin here, and Carcross Tagish First Nation, are leading the way by starting their own farms, which marry education, market growing, and animal husbandry, and also tourism as a way to bring back people to the land and increase the amount of fresh foods on people's plates and encourage indigenuity in northern agriculture. Across Canada, it is our Indigenous communities that are leading the way in climate solutions. My community of Old Crow of 250 people, the most northerly community, has built and owns the largest solar electric generation project in the circumpolar north. This solar farm produces a maximum of 940 kilowatts that will replace 189,000 liters of diesel electricity per year. Our leaders plan to have our community completely off diesel in 2023, and they will include biomass and wind energy. It's happening a lot across Canada and in the north. We have been doing community-based research. I'd like to bring recognition to Dr. Harriet Kuhnlein, who taught me so much in the past years, who was here, about community-based research. And we, of course, take it to another level where to address our food insecurity concerns by doing local research with the people that they want to do and to come to their own solutions for their own future. The research is done very respectfully, following the OCAP principles that were created by our national Indigenous organization, the Assembly of First Nations, where research will communities are saying that research will not be done about us without us anymore. And that these OCAP principles of ownership, control, access, and possession are what guide community-based research and Indigenous-led research in our communities. The Chief and Council asked us to come in at the proposal stage, and we do not go into a community uninvited. We create a guiding committee of knowledgeable people and carefully selected representatives of families in a village based on their knowledge, men, women, elders, and youth. And then we select the youth that we are going to train. We train them in their gender balanced. We train them in climate change, what is happening globally, and how it's affecting their food sources, affecting their communities in all the ways that are happening before their eyes. The selection of the interviewees are also very carefully done, and the youth are the ones that interview. We train them to do that. We hire them. We pay them approximately $125 a day. They need more than that now. They're chosen carefully, and they are trained in researching, understanding Indigenous protocols within the community, and how to conduct themselves in a good way. We go into people's homes and we have tea. The camera is rolling. They do photo voicing. We train them how to run their cameras and do photo voicing. The youth are sitting in front of their own people, their own relatives with a tape recorder, asking the hard questions. Grandma, how did you live long time ago in the 80s when there was hardly any food? What can we do in the future now to make things better and stronger for our people? What are the solutions for us after you're gone? And that's the kind of knowledge that these youth ask their grandmothers and grandfathers and their people. The community-based research that we do encompasses 4 directions: fire, earth, water, air, and the emotional, physical, and all of that, spiritual. And it's very holistic. The solutions come from the hearts of the people, their own solutions. Research is relevant, action is the goal, and solutions are grounded in life experience, like harvest camps, for example. Our people used to do harvest camps years and years ago, where our people go one place together and they all hunt together. They bring back the food, and the women prepare the food. We go pick berries and put everything together, and then in the last 2 days we do celebration and we give all the food to everyone, and that's how we're going back to now. This was our ancient methods. If there's no moose, they bring in bison that was introduced. If there's no berries, they bring in peaches and fruits from the Okanagan. And these are the southern villages in the Yukon. And if berries don't grow that year, they bring fruit. And the potlatch begins, and medicines are collected, fish, rhubarb, and all shared. Also, gardens are beginning to grow a lot. The Arctic, in my community in particular, is not. It's pretty hard to grow garden there, but because we have permafrost soil. However, we have a community garden, and we're going to get a better one. I feel deeply inspired as an elder because of our drums. They're echoing now. They're loud. Our young people in the southern part of the Yukon are dancing. They've embraced arts and culture, and it's really incredible. I never thought I'd see that for a long time, but it's happening, and it's beautiful to see. And they're so powerful, these young people, and I'm so proud of them. Our language was asleep for a long time, and now we have 7 linguistic nations in the Yukon Territory. And in each of our community, we have 1 or 2 youth that just woke up the language, or it was given to them again, and they speak so fluently in our ceremonies. So the languages are waking up. And seeing our young people get up and speak in different languages is absolutely incredible. And it's like the ancestors are there. Lots of young leaders are rising, especially women. These are revitalizing our people. Even though we have high food insecurity, suicide, we are seeing this rise and rejuvenation of our indigeneity that is very strong and important to me as an elder. Internationally and nationally, we are starting to see protocols of sustainability as from Indigenous people, and the world is finally recognizing that they cannot do this work of conservation of what's left of our planet without us as Indigenous people. And women and youth will lead from heart. Training and preparing our youth is one of the most important aspects of resiliency. So has been a focus of many Indigenous leaders in Yukon and across Canada, building up our Indigenous youth in ways of our people, guided by Indigenous spirituality, is what our elders have been pushing for millennia, for many years. For 12 years as the Director of Indigenous Collaboration at AICBR, we trained hundreds of youth in and outside their communities. In 2017 to 19, 41 youth came from nearly all communities in the Yukon to Whitehorse, along with other guests from other parts of the Arctic communities, to learn about climate change globally. We bring the global perspective of what's happening in the world and bring it to their communities, and we build their resiliency to be advocates for their communities and to do community-based research, and also to assess their own communities and plan with their communities. Where are you going to be evacuated when the big fire comes? What kind of foods are we going to plant? What kind of gardens are we going to have? Where are we going to put the gardens? What kind of clean energy are we going to do? When are we going to get off diesel? These are the youth that are doing this now. The scientists and elders, they come and teach. We bring scientists from various places across Canada, and we get them to teach the youth, and then we bring elders in also to teach them Indigenous knowledge. We identify from learning from the earth, air, fire, and water, and how to assess impacts of climate change, as well as identify the priorities within our communities. Some examples of what we are also engaged with government is on the rise of Indigenous Guardians programs, which train Indigenous people as the eyes and ears of the land and bring them back to their traditional roles as stewards. We have a lot of species that have are being extinct, and endangered species. And this is a way for our people to bring back life to those species and be on the land all the time. So some examples, the rise of these programs will train our people. Our Indigenous peoples are honoring their responsibility to the land in ways that are informed by traditions of our ancestors and draw on the tools of the modern world. We do it by conserving and watching over our territories. We watch over our nations now. That includes creating Indigenous protected areas. The Indigenous protected areas that currently exist in Canada were created on a case-by-case basis. Over 80% of all new protected areas created since year 2000 have been led by or have heavy decision-making by our own Indigenous governments. Indigenous protected areas can be invaluable tools to sustain what remains, to honor what has not been lost. These programs also bring vital economic opportunities to our communities and cultural education that is needed for our visitors to our lands. Part of my current role as the co-director of the newly formed Canadian Mountain Network, we are seeking to fund and develop more local capacity for research led by and with Indigenous communities, two-eyed seeing as well. This is the first time in Canadian history that the National Centres of Excellence has accepted an application for the creation of a network that seeks to support community-based and Indigenous-led research, where the communities living in the mountainous regions conduct their own research based on their own Indigenous knowledge and laws, which are relevant and address their immediate needs. All of these actions, though, have one thing in common. It's developing a local capacity to create solutions to the issues we are faced with at the local levels. The solutions are building partnerships, coming together at every level in true respect. They're about understanding, listening to each other, especially to those who have lived on the land since time immemorial. In working together, we have to remember to maintain the beauty of caring for one another through these challenging times in this world. We need to grow food instead of grass, wherever we possibly can, on our balconies, turn lawns into gardens, build a forest of food in the inner cities, uptown, downtown, wherever we can, and share it with people. It's also good for the air that we breathe, that we do this. They are about reconciliation and sovereignty over our lives as peoples and as nations. We want to take our own sovereignty, take our own lives, and move it forward, and as we are. We have to protect nature, all its elements, as long as we possibly can. This is where our power lies. This island of ours, what they call North America, is in elections now. Our job is to vote for our planet. I have a little film called Norma's Story to summarize. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to engaging and working with you guys into the future. Masi Choshalaknai.